73 years ago, the Erebus disappeared into the quiet dark beyond charted space, and the universe swallowed every trace of it. Humanity had searched for decades, combing through radiation trails, gravitational anomalies, and debris fields, praying for something that would explain how a state-of-the-art colony vessel carrying 12,000 souls could simply vanish. But no answers came. The last message from the Erebus, a routine status ping confirming stable course and life support, became a ghostly reminder etched into history. Families grieved, governments held memorials, and eventually the tragedy faded into a distant wound that time could dull but never close. Now the silence that once defined the Erebus is broken. A sensor array station near the Kuiper Expanse flagged an incoming mass that matched no known vessel on record. It drifted unguided, unlit, and almost invisible except for the faint distortions it cast in the vacuum around it. Only when it crossed the detection threshold did its profile resolve enough for analysts to understand the magnitude of what they were seeing. The Erebus had returned. Initial scans confirmed structural integrity far beyond what a 70-year derelict should possess, yet the hull bore deep fractures, fused metal scars, and strange lattice-like burns that did not correspond to any human weapon. Portions of the outer plating had been reshaped, almost melted and reforged by forces the analysts struggled to categorize. There were no active transmissions, no distress beacons, not even the faint whisper of automated life support routines. It was like the ship had been hollowed out and left to drift home on momentum alone. The discovery ignited panic, awe, and confusion across every communication channel. Military strategists feared contamination, infiltration, or some delayed threat concealed within the vessel. Scientists scrambled for early data, hunting for any clue pointing to where the Erebus had been all these years. Politicians worried about public reaction, knowing the return of a ship once mourned would reopen old wounds. And families of the lost felt a surge of impossible hope tempered by the dread of what the truth might reveal. Even the most cynical minds could not ignore the symbolic weight of a ghost returning to the cradle of humanity exactly 73 years after vanishing. The Lunar Command Council convened an emergency summit within hours. Representatives from all major powers, along with civilian advisors, were briefed on the anomaly. Every fragment of available data projected onto the chamber walls painted a picture that was both miraculous and deeply unsettling. Radiation patterns surrounding the vessel indicated proximity to extreme cosmic phenomena, energies normally found near collapsed stars or temporal shear zones. Gravitational readings suggested the ship had passed through environments capable of tearing apart metal frameworks many times thicker than the Erebus's hull. Yet despite all of this, the vessel remained largely intact, almost unnaturally so. The part that alarmed the Council most was the energy signature embedded deep within the ship's core. It did not match any human power source, nor any extraterrestrial profile catalogued from decades of exploratory missions. The energy pulsed intermittently, like a heartbeat slowed to a crawl, powerful enough that even dormant it distorted sensor readings across several astronomical units. Engineers whispered about containment failure scenarios. Theoretical physicists speculated about technologies capable of reshaping matter on a fundamental level. Some argued the ship should be destroyed before it reached inner orbit, fearing the unknown more than the loss of a relic. But humans, for all their fear, remained creatures eager for understanding. Curiosity overcame hesitation. The consensus formed: the Erebus must be boarded, inspected, and understood. The truth, however unsettling, belonged to humanity. And more importantly, whatever the ship carried, whether knowledge or danger, had already returned to their doorstep. As drones conducted initial sweeps, a new anomaly emerged. The Erebus did not appear to have arrived through a conventional trajectory. Its vector hinted at a sudden emergence into normal space, as if it had been expelled from somewhere that obeyed different rules of motion and time. This raised possibilities that no one dared voice aloud: wormholes, dimensional fractures, higher-order constructs. Concepts relegated to speculative physics now sat on the Council's display screens with unsettling confidence. The only certainty was that the Erebus had come home changed. And whatever fate befell the 12,000 souls aboard might not remain a mystery for long. humanity stood on the verge of a revelation carved into the hull of a ship that should have died 73 years ago, yet now drifted silently, patiently, as though waiting for them to find the courage to open its doors. The moment confirmation spread that the Erebus had truly returned, Earth's population shifted from shock to anxious anticipation. News networks filled every broadcast slot with speculation, experts debated theories with rising urgency, and families of the lost were thrust back into the spotlight as if the decades of grief had been rewound in an instant. The public needed answers, but the people responsible for safeguarding humanity needed something far more important: certainty. The Erebus was no ordinary derelict. It was a potential threat whose nature no one yet understood. Within Lunar Command, discussions turned heated as soon as the full council convened. The return of a massive, silent vessel carrying unknown energy signatures was treated as an event bordering on interstellar crisis. The highest-ranking officials from military, scientific, and diplomatic divisions filled the chamber, each bringing their fears and priorities. Some demanded immediate quarantine of the ship, others pushed for aggressive containment measures, and a few argued that destroying the Erebus from a distance might be the safest option. But destruction, even as a precaution, felt like sacrilege and cowardice in the same breath. It was an artifact of human history, carrying the last physical traces of thousands of people who had once dreamed of a new world. The scientific division presented their data with clinical precision. Gravitational fluctuations surrounding the vessel hinted at exposure to phenomena capable of tearing apart molecular bonds. Hull readings revealed heat damage far exceeding any known human propulsion system. Residue analysis detected elements and isotopes never catalogued in any natural environment within explored space. The ship had not just traveled, it had endured something far beyond any conventional voyage. That alone made the cautionary voices louder. If the Erebus carried something dangerous, or worse, something alive, every delay in dealing with it added risk. Yet hiding beneath these arguments was something stronger than fear: responsibility. Humanity had grown in the decades since the Erebus vanished. They had expanded their technology, unified many of their fractured factions, and developed a cautious but determined outlook toward the unknown. Destroying the ship would betray that progress. Letting it drift would invite danger. Investigating it directly became the only viable option, though it remained the most perilous. Diplomatic advisors argued that any rash action could have cosmic consequences. If the Erebus had encountered intelligent life, the condition of the ship might represent the first message between species, one written in destroyed metal and ruptured corridors. Humanity could not afford to respond with panic. A misinterpreted act could ignite conflict on a scale far beyond anything they had prepared for. Restraint and clarity were essential. Then came the families of those once aboard. Their voices echoed through public channels, pleas for answers, for closure, for dignity. They demanded the truth be faced rather than feared. Their pressure, amplified by global empathy, became impossible for governments to ignore. The Erebus was not just a mystery. It was a wound reopened, and humanity felt the weight of those 12,000 lost lives pressing on every decision. The turning point arrived when analysts revealed a troubling spike in the Erebus's core. The alien energy signature, once steady, had begun fluctuating. Though faint, the oscillations resembled patterns associated with activation cycles in advanced power systems. The abnormal readings convinced even the most hesitant officials that inaction was no longer an option. The ship was changing, however subtly, and the cause remained unknown. Humanity needed to understand what it was dealing with before that signature escalated into something uncontrollable. The final decision formed from reluctant agreement. Humanity would approach the Erebus with discipline, caution, and resolve. The military would secure the perimeter, ensuring no potential threat could exit the vessel. Scientists would prepare to analyze every discovered anomaly. Engineers would construct remote access rigs, safeguarding crews as much as possible. A boarding team would be assembled from the most capable individuals Earth could offer, experts trained not only in exploration and combat but also in diplomacy, exobiology, linguistics, and high-risk engineering. Public statements were drafted with extreme care. The announcement emphasized unity, transparency, and determination. Humanity would confront the truth head-on, not simply because it needed answers, but because turning away from this moment would betray everything the species had become. The Erebus's return was not just a scientific puzzle, it was a test of the values humans claimed to uphold, a test of courage, discipline, and honor. As final preparations began, a quiet resolve settled across Earth and its colonies. Whatever waited aboard the Erebus, humanity would face it together, not as fragmented nations but as a single, wary, determined species finally ready to confront the unknown that had come home to them. Selecting the team that would board the Erebus became the most scrutinized process in recent history. Every individual chosen represented a deliberate balance of expertise, composure, and adaptability. Humanity understood that this mission was not simply an investigation. It was a confrontation with the unknown, one that demanded people capable of thinking clearly under pressure no training simulation had ever prepared them for. The first to be evaluated were the engineers. The Erebus's condition made it clear that standard systems knowledge would be insufficient. The chosen engineers were those with rare cross-disciplinary experience, men and women who had studied everything from fusion cores to experimental temporal mechanics. They were selected not only for their intelligence but for their ability to improvise when faced with machinery that defied familiar logic. Their task was to identify how the Erebus still held together, determine the source of the energy signature, and understand whether the ship's structural anomalies presented an immediate threat. Next came the scientists. They were recruited from fields grounded in the study of worlds beyond human comprehension, xenochemistry, gravitational physics, exotic matter theory. These were researchers who had pushed against the boundaries of accepted reality for decades, often dismissed as too speculative for mainstream programs. Now their unconventional thinking was a necessity. They would interpret the unknown residues, analyze the hull scars, and decipher any biological or non-biological traces that hinted at what the Erebus had endured. The inclusion of linguists raised eyebrows at first, but their role was essential. If the Erebus had encountered another civilization, traces of communication might be hidden within its databanks or etched into damaged sections of its interior. The team needed specialists capable of parsing unfamiliar patterns, identifying structure in chaos, and detecting meaning in symbols no human culture had ever produced. These linguists possessed deep knowledge of semiotics, artificial languages, and cryptographic logic, enabling them to recognize intentional design rather than meaningless noise. Marines were also added, though their purpose extended far beyond security. They were trained in zero-gravity combat, containment protocols, and rapid response tactics involving unknown variables. Their mission was not to engage threats recklessly, but to protect the team while maintaining discipline under conditions that would challenge human reflexes and instincts. They understood that a single misjudgment could trigger an irreversible reaction from something inside the Erebus. Historians were brought in as well, an unconventional choice that reflected a deeper strategic mindset. These specialists had studied ancient civilizations, extinct languages, and cultural behaviors across millennia. Their presence was meant to provide perspective. If the Erebus displayed artifacts or environmental patterns suggestive of alien societies, the historians could interpret symbolic structures and contextualize them in ways scientific analysis alone might overlook. Understanding motive, belief, or hierarchy could be as vital as understanding machinery. Despite the range of expertise, each candidate underwent a psychological evaluation far more rigorous than standard exploration assignments. The Erebus represented trauma returned from the void. Anyone stepping aboard would face immense psychological strain, claustrophobia triggered by silent corridors, emotional weight from confronting the remnants of a lost human mission, and existential dread from encountering forces that had scarred the ship beyond recognition. Only those with exceptional stability and controlled emotional profiles were approved. As the final roster came together, an unexpected unity formed among its members. They had never served on the same missions previously, yet they shared a quiet understanding that any individual weakness could jeopardize all of humanity. Their training sessions focused not on combat drills or scientific procedures but on communication, coordination, and mental resilience. They rehearsed protocols for environmental collapse, unknown biological exposure, anomalous physics events, and information contamination. The goal was to prepare them for the unpredictable, not for a defined set of threats. What set this team apart was not skill alone but their willingness to confront a truth that frightened even the leaders who assembled them. They acknowledged that whatever happened to the Erebus could happen again, to another ship or perhaps to Earth itself. Their mission was not simply to gather data. It was to identify whether humanity faced a repeating danger. In their private moments leading up to deployment, some reviewed the names of passengers lost 73 years earlier, silently promising to recover whatever fragments of their fates still existed. Others focused solely on the mission parameters, avoiding emotional entanglement. But all felt the same gravity. They were about to step across a threshold no one else could. When final approval was given, the team stood ready, not driven by heroism, but by responsibility. Humanity had asked them to face the unknown. They would do so with steady minds, clear purpose, and the understanding that the answers they uncovered might redefine everything their species believed about survival and the vast, indifferent universe beyond. The boarding team entered the Erebus under strict protocols, but nothing in their training prepared them for the first steps inside the vessel. The moment their boots crossed the threshold, they understood the ship was not merely abandoned, it had been altered by forces that did not respect human engineering or natural physics. The corridor beyond the airlock felt unnervingly cold, yet sensors detected no temperature drop. It was as if the space carried the memory of an impossible chill that clung to the air without affecting matter. Illumination flickered sporadically from panels that should have been dead decades ago. Their glow carried an unnatural distortion, bending shadows in ways inconsistent with the corridor's architecture. The metal surfaces revealed deep gouges running parallel along the walls, too uniform to be random damage yet too erratic to have been created by tools. They looked like scars left by something that passed through the ship without fully interacting with physical matter, leaving impressions rather than breaks. The absence of human remains was immediate and disturbing. Cryopods were empty, stasis stations unoccupied, and emergency gear untouched. Not a single trace of the 12,000 passengers appeared in the initial chambers. No bodies, no clothing, no blood, not even the mundane clutter that accumulates during long voyages. It was as though the crew had been selectively extracted, removed without resistance or chaos. Yet the interior damage contradicted any peaceful explanation. Gravity wavered as they advanced deeper. One moment it felt normal, the next it weakened, causing steps to lengthen unintentionally. The engineers monitored the fluctuations, noting that the shifts did not align with the ship's artificial gravity systems. Instead, they matched oscillations similar to mild temporal shear, distortions that pulled at mass without altering velocity. This presented an unnerving implication. The Erebus had passed through regions where time and gravity were not constants. Symbols appeared next, carved into bulkheads with meticulous intention. Their geometry followed a pattern no human culture would choose, fluid curves merging into abrupt angular breaks. Linguists captured every detail, recognizing that the sequence repeated in variations, suggesting grammar or operational coding rather than artwork or tagging. The markings were not drawn over damaged areas but embedded beside them, almost like annotations left by entities documenting what had happened. Moving toward the central spine of the ship, the team encountered sealed doors fused shut by unknown reactions. The metal around these seals displayed a crystallized texture, as if subjected to extreme compression followed by instantaneous stabilization. Cutting through these barriers required micro-drills capable of atom-level adjustments, and even then progress was slow. The fused surfaces did not behave like any alloy in the Erebus's original construction. Inside the first breached compartment, they found evidence of internal conflict. Scattered fragments of handheld devices lay embedded in the walls as if launched at lethal velocity. A command console was warped inward, its frame twisted as though subjected to a sudden external pressure spike that had collapsed only specific parts of the room. Yet the surrounding air ducts and ceiling panels were untouched. The selective damage suggested forces that did not propagate uniformly, localized disruptions targeting certain materials but ignoring others. Data terminals flickered with incomplete logs. The screens displayed static broken by flashes of corrupted text. Timestamps cycled unpredictably, showing dates from decades apart in rapid succession. The temporal inconsistencies confirmed suspicions. The Erebus had not experienced time linearly. Portions of the ship had aged at different rates, while others seemed frozen in conditions identical to their last recorded state 73 years earlier. As they moved closer to engineering, an eerie tone, barely perceptible, vibrated through the structure. It wasn't sound in the conventional sense but a mechanical resonance carried through the metal hull. It repeated at irregular intervals, resembling a malfunctioning system trying to reboot. Sensors traced the vibrations to the region where the unidentified energy signature originated. The frequency suggested intentional modulation rather than mechanical fault, as if something deep within the ship attempted to communicate in a form humans were not meant to detect audibly. Despite the corruption in the ship's systems, a single alarming trend emerged: power flows were redirecting in tiny increments toward the core. The Erebus was waking up, not fully, but gradually, as though responding to the presence of humans or some latent protocol triggered by their arrival. Every detail inside the ship reinforced a growing certainty among the team. Whatever had shaped the Erebus after its disappearance, whatever forces had carved symbols into steel, manipulated time, and removed thousands of passengers, it had not intended for the ship to fall apart. It had been preserved, changed, and sent back. And the people now walking its corridors were the first humans to witness the aftermath of that transformation. They felt the weight of that knowledge with every step they took deeper into the ship that had died, survived, and returned carrying secrets meant to challenge the boundaries of human understanding. Reaching the lower engineering decks required bypassing multiple sealed bulkheads, each one demonstrating structural distortions stronger than those found earlier. The metal appeared stretched, not torn, as if something had gripped the material on a molecular level and pulled it in opposing directions before forcing it back into place. The deeper the team went, the more pronounced these unnatural textures became. It was clear the heart of the ship had endured events the outer corridors merely hinted at. Beyond the final barrier lay an access hall leading to a chamber the Erebus's original schematics labeled as a secure storage vault. But the vault door waiting for them was not the one the ship had launched with. The original design called for standard hardened alloy. This door was an entirely different construct, geometric plates interlocked in shifting patterns, reacting subtly to the team's presence even without being touched. Its surface carried the same alien symbols found elsewhere, but here they were organized with mathematical precision, almost like a calculus of access. Engineers attempted traditional overrides first, but none of the equipment registered the door as metallic. Its composition was unknown, resistant to scanning, and immune to controlled energy fields. It opened only when a specific waveform, accidentally triggered by an engineer's diagnostic pulse, resonated across its surface. The plates folded back silently, creating an entryway with perfect symmetry. Inside, the atmosphere held a stillness so absolute it felt intentionally curated. Racks lined both sides of the chamber, each containing objects that violated expectations of weapon design. Instead of barrels, emitters, or power cells, these instruments looked more like crystallized concepts of destruction, forms shaped by logic foreign to human warfare. The first device resembled a shard of semi-transparent material suspended within a stabilization cradle. It didn't reflect light, it absorbed detail, pulling the eye toward its center with unsettling intensity. Instruments detected microfractures in the surrounding air, localized distortions similar to those created in controlled space-time experiments, yet infinitely more precise. Linguists noted symbols etched along the shard's base, notations consistent with warnings, not instructions. Another object hovered within a magnetic brace without any active containment. Engineers confirmed it produced a gravitational pull strong enough to warp nearby readings, yet the force never extended beyond a strict boundary. It pulsed faintly, compressing the space around it as though simulating singularity behavior on a scale too small to pose immediate harm. Still, its existence implied mastery of gravitational manipulation far beyond human capability. A third device featured interlocking rings that rotated without mechanical support. Each ring carried fragments of an unknown alloy, engraved with sequences that updated continuously. As the linguists watched, The markings changed configuration, adapting their patterns according to an algorithm no one could track. When a researcher reached toward it, all rings abruptly synchronized and emitted a focused shockwave that passed harmlessly through material objects but scrambled digital recording systems. Only manual observation remained reliable. Terminal logs near the rear of the chamber provided the most disturbing revelation. Despite heavy corruption, certain entries were still legible. The Erebus crew had not discovered these weapons fully formed. They had found fragments of designs, components, blueprints, incomplete matrices, and had reverse-engineered them over generations of desperate adaptation. Their descendants had developed enough understanding to assemble functional versions, even while lacking the foundational knowledge to control them safely. Notes detailed failed attempts, catastrophic miscalculations, and partial successes that only deepened their determination. The logs painted a bleak picture of necessity. The crew had been under constant threat from an unknown force described only through brief phrases. Silence expanding, erasure fields, shadows without mass. The weapons represented their only hope of defense. They built them not out of ambition, but because survival demanded embracing knowledge no human civilization should wield. In the farthest corner of the chamber lay a device unlike the rest, a cube with surfaces shifting through configurations faster than neural processing could follow. It emitted no measurable energy, yet everyone felt a subtle pressure when standing near it, as if thoughts themselves were being influenced. The historians immediately recognized the conceptual weight behind such an artifact. It wasn't designed to destroy, it was designed to alter, perhaps transform the very principles of matter or perception. As the team catalogued each item, a collective realization settled over them. The Erebus had not returned as a derelict carrying relics. It carried weapons shaped through human hands, born from alien templates, refined through necessity, and preserved for reasons no one yet understood. The chamber was not an armory. It was a testament to what humanity could become when forced to match civilizations far older and far more ruthless. Whatever had driven the crew to create these instruments had left its imprint on the ship. And now those creations rested in the hands of a civilization unprepared for the weight they carried. The discovery of the armory forced the team to search for any surviving records that could explain how the Erebus had transformed from a colony vessel into a forge for impossible weapons. Most terminals throughout the ship were corrupted, trapped in looping error cycles or displaying fragments of nonsensical data. But in a sealed operations chamber adjacent to the central engineering shaft, they found a cluster of older storage nodes that had avoided the temporal distortions affecting the rest of the ship. The nodes were heavily degraded, but the linguists and engineers stabilized enough fragments to reconstruct partial logs. What emerged was not a cohesive timeline, but a mosaic of terrifying clarity. The Erebus had not simply strayed off course, it had been intercepted. Log entries referenced an encounter with an entity or civilization referred to by multiple names. Architects, silence makers, the quiet orbit, and most consistently, architects of silence. Each term conveyed a sense of scale, as though these beings were less a species and more a fundamental force interacting with the universe on its own terms. The earliest surviving logs described the moment of contact. Crew members reported the surrounding void dimming beyond natural darkness, sensors failing without mechanical cause, and voices echoing in the calm channels that did not belong to any human on board. The distortion had begun subtly, like interference, but soon escalated into a phenomenon that disrupted all forms of electromagnetic communication. Moments later, navigational data collapsed entirely as if space itself had been redefined. As the ship's system spiraled into chaos, the crew discovered something far more alarming: time discrepancies. Chronometers drifted out of sync, biological rhythms faltered, and portions of the ship experienced dilation so severe that minutes stretched into hours. Logs written moments apart contradicted each other. Some entries described sudden aging in isolated compartments, others mentioned equipment remaining pristine despite sustained stress. The architects of silence did not attack in conventional ways. They manipulated the fabric around the Erebus, exerting pressure that erased information, corrupted memory, and degraded structural integrity without leaving visible sources. The crew could not locate an enemy, only the consequences of its presence. The earliest logs reflected confusion, then fear, then a grim shift towards strategy. Humans, even when overwhelmed, refused to surrender to an unseen adversary. One entry, recovered almost perfectly, detailed a breakthrough made by a team of physicists and mathematicians. They realized the distortions were not random assaults, but deliberate patterns. The architects communicated through structured absences, shaping silence into meaning. Without comprehending the full message, the crew nonetheless detected a consistent directive embedded within the distortions. They were trespassing. The Erebus had crossed into a region the architects considered forbidden, and their response was neither negotiation nor warning, only the systematic unraveling of the ship's presence. Faced with erasure, the crew changed their objective from colonization to survival. They began studying the distortions, analyzing the fractures in physics surrounding them, and reverse engineering the forces acting upon them. Generations passed within the shifting flows of time. For some parts of the ship, decades unfolded. For others, only months. The descendants of the original passengers inherited a fragmented world where the threat was constant yet incomprehensible. They adapted by building what they could from the fragments of alien influence, structures that resisted temporal shifts, devices that stabilized gravity, and eventually the prototypes that became the weapons in the vault. Later logs showed a growing defiance. Humans had decoded enough to counter certain forms of distortion. They built mechanisms that interrupted the architect's silence fields, creating pockets of stable space where human systems could function. Each breakthrough carried losses, but each success hardened the crew's resolve. One of the final logs found detailed their most desperate act. The ship's remaining leadership initiated an offensive attempt, directed not at the architects themselves, but at the field holding them captive. They managed, for a brief moment, to tear a hole back into normal space. The cost was catastrophic, and no log detailed what sacrifices made that escape possible. The recording ended with a line spoken in a calm, steady voice. "If we fall, let the path remain open." After reviewing everything, the team faced a chilling truth. The Erebus had fled something that never intended for it to escape. The silence fields, the distortions, the scars, they were not remnants of random cosmic phenomena but attempts to erase the ship entirely. Yet the crew had found a way to defy it long enough to break through and set a course home. The logs ended abruptly, leaving the final fate of the crew unclear. But their message endured. They had not vanished. They had fought, adapted, and forced their way back to humanity bearing weapons forged in desperation and warnings shaped by survival. The team had almost given up hope of finding any trace of the original crew when they reached the quantum memory chamber tucked behind reinforced partitions near the ship's medbay sector. Unlike the other compartments, this one showed no signs of warping or temporal collapse. Its walls were pristine, untouched by the distortions that had reshaped every other part of the Erebus. That alone made the chamber feel unnatural, preserved by a force that wanted it to endure when everything else was left to decay. At the center stood a containment cradle housing a smooth cylindrical core surrounded by a faint halo of suspended particles. The device emitted a subtle vibration, not mechanical, not electronic, but something that resonated within the senses rather than the ears. The moment the engineers attempted to interface with it, the particles around the core shimmered, forming shapes reminiscent of shifting holograms before stabilizing into a coherent projection. What materialized was a digital consciousness. Not a full personality simulation, nor a static recording, but a living echo of someone who had once commanded the Erebus, Captain Rhea Malorum. Her image flickered, not due to degradation but because her presence existed in fragments, reconstructed from partial data burned into the core under catastrophic conditions. She recognized the boarding team, though not as individuals, more like she understood the concept of human observers returning to the ship she once led. Her voice emerged in layered tones, each syllable carrying the weight of multiple timelines stitched together. The echo did not greet them, it delivered warnings shaped by desperation and duty. Words came slowly at first, strained as if retrieved from damaged memory sectors. She spoke of boundaries the ship had crossed, of entities that treated reality like a domain to be sculpted, and of a struggle that had pushed the crew beyond the limits of human endurance. One phrase repeated with unsettling clarity. "We found the edge." When pressed, the Echo elaborated, not geographically, but conceptually. The Erebus had reached a threshold where the known universe intersected with structures engineered by the architects of silence. The boundaries were not meant to be traversed, and crossing them had activated mechanisms designed to erase intrusions. According to her fragmented account, the architects had no interest in communication or coexistence. Their presence enforced cosmic order the way gravity enforces motion. They perceived anomalies, not species. The Erebus had been classified as one such anomaly the moment it drifted into their domain. Captain Malorum's Echo described the sensation of being unmade, crew memories dissolving, equipment reverting to states from earlier hours, whole compartments lost to chronological folds. Yet humans resisted. The Echo recounted the first efforts to stabilize temporal regions, using improvised field generators built from components the architects themselves had altered. The crew turned those distortions into tools, regaining enough control to slow the unraveling that threatened their existence. Her tone shifted when she recalled their decision to build the weapons. She did not defend the choice, she acknowledged it with a sober acceptance. The crew knew the dangers of shaping forces beyond comprehension, but survival demanded action. Each weapon was a gamble against annihilation, a challenge to entities incapable of recognizing human determination. She paused, as though retrieving a missing thread, before revealing the most critical message. The Erebus had not returned because the crew escaped. It returned because the architects allowed it, or perhaps directed it, after the ship triggered an event the Echo could not fully describe. She warned that the artifacts in the armory were not defensive tools but keys capable of provoking reactions from the architects themselves. Humans had never truly mastered them. They had only learned enough to resist erasure briefly. Her final message fractured as internal instability surged through the chamber. Even in her fragmented state, she issued one last directive. "Do not awaken what sleeps." The words carried a depth that reached beyond caution. They suggested the architects were not active overseers but dormant forces awaiting violations of their domain. The Erebus's return, she implied, could be interpreted as such a violation, especially if humanity attempted to harness the weapons rather than secure them. As the projection dissolved, the team was left with a chilling realization. Captain Malorum had not survived in any conventional sense. Her consciousness had been preserved only as a warning system, encoded through methods likely borrowed from the very beings she feared. She was not a remnant of the past but a sentinel engineered to alert future humans of dangers they were not prepared to confront. Her disappearance left the chamber silent again, yet the weight of her message pressed heavily on the team. The Erebus had not come home carrying answers. It had come home carrying consequences. Beyond the quantum memory chamber, deeper into the engineering spine, lay a sealed partition none of the schematics had ever mentioned. It was not part of the Erebus's original architecture, nor did it match the alien alterations found elsewhere. This structure felt different, intentional, deliberate, and protected by a design that blended human workmanship with something far older. Its presence raised immediate suspicion. The crew had enclosed something they did not want exposed, even to themselves. The door bore no controls. Its surface showed faint grooves arranged in concentric spirals, each layer subtly misaligned, as though responding to forces slightly out of sync with the rest of the ship. When the boarding team approached, sensors detected an energy pulse behind the barrier, quiet but rhythmically active, almost like a restrained beat. Engineers noted that the fluctuations matched the same frequency Captain Malorum's Echo had exhibited during her final message. This chamber, whatever its purpose, had been central to the crew's last efforts before the ship broke free of the architects. Attempts to force entry proved futile. Cutting tools blunted instantly, as though the material absorbed energy and redistributed the impact across its entire structure. Remote probes malfunctioned when placed too close, their data feeds collapsing into static ruptured by distorted harmonics. The only successful method of opening the chamber came accidentally. A researcher, while running diagnostics on the surrounding walls, emitted a resonance pattern nearly identical to one found in the armory logs. The concentric spirals shifted, rotating inward until a narrow passage opened. Inside, the chamber defied expectations. Instead of weaponry, machinery, or remains, the room held a single spherical object suspended at the center. It floated without visible support, anchored by fields the instruments could not identify. The sphere emitted a dim radiance reminiscent of deep ocean bioluminescence, soft, rhythmic, and strangely hypnotic. The energy pulsing from it matched nothing in human science. It did not register as heat, electricity, radiation, or gravitational distortion. Instead, it produced a phenomenon the translators described as informational pressure, a concentrated distortion affecting probability fields. In essence, it manipulated outcomes on a microscopic scale, nudging reality towards specific states. This discovery unsettled the scientists more than any weapon. Something capable of shaping likelihoods was far beyond even the speculative theories developed on Earth. Linguists examined the faint markings hovering across the sphere's surface. Unlike the carvings found elsewhere, these symbols shifted constantly but not randomly. They transitioned in sequences resembling evolving syntax, as though the sphere were speaking in a language built from logic instead of sound. When correlated with the restored logs, a horrifying conclusion emerged. This sphere was likely the mechanism that allowed the Erebus to break free from the architect's domain. The weapon chamber had suggested desperation. This chamber revealed strategy. The crew had not only tried to survive, they had attempted to escape a reality designed to erase them. The sphere was the culmination of that effort, a device built from fragments of alien phenomena, shaped through human ingenuity and sheer necessity. But the logs hinted at something more disturbing. The sphere had not merely opened a path out. It had signaled, intentionally or not, across dimensions that humanity had tampered with forces the architects monitored. As the boarding team observed the sphere, the energy pulse intensified. Readings spiked. Probabilistic fluctuations grew unstable. System monitors on the Erebus reacted spontaneously, rerouting dormant power conduits toward the chamber. A pattern emerged across the displays, one matching the same sequence the echo of Captain Malorum had struggled to convey. The sphere was broadcasting. Not outward but inward. It was searching. Then the probability field inside the chamber shifted sharply. For a brief moment, the team witnessed the distortion ripple through the sphere's surface, revealing a glimpse of something beyond its shell, an immense void threaded with geometric forms moving in deliberate, silent arcs. The image vanished instantly, but its impact lingered. The sphere was not merely a tool. It was a beacon attuned to the constructs of the architects themselves. The most chilling discovery came a moment later. The energy signature within the sphere was not dormant. It was rising in amplitude, cycling through what the scientists recognized as activation phases. These phases aligned perfectly with the temporal patterns etched into the Erebus during its final struggle. Captain Malorum's warning became painfully clear. The Erebus had not returned by chance. The ship had been sent back with the sphere acting as a tether, an invitation or a summons, waiting for human hands to open the chamber and allow the signal to resume. The boarding team realized too late that the sphere was not awakening because they found it. It was awakening because it had been waiting for them. The moment the sphere's activation pattern stabilized, the boarding team relayed their findings to Lunar Command. The transmission ignited a reaction across every major authority on Earth. The implications were immediate and dire. A device that manipulated probability fields was accelerating toward a condition no one understood, and its resonance mirrored signatures linked to the architects of silence. It was not a malfunction. It was a response. And that realization triggered a level of political and scientific urgency unmatched in decades. Within hours, Earth's governments dissolved their usual borders of authority and reconvened into a unified emergency assembly. The Erebus had returned carrying more than weapons or warnings. It carried a mechanism that could be interpreted as a provocation. Now humanity had to choose how to confront what the crew had engineered, what the architects had shaped, and what the sphere was on the verge of signaling. Scientists argued fiercely. Those studying the armory insisted the weapons were too unstable to remain unused. If the architects detected the sphere's activation, they could reappear in full force, and Earth stood defenseless without countermeasures. They presented data showing that the weapons, even in their incomplete forms, could disrupt distortions and stabilize regions of space affected by the architect's influence. This knowledge, they said, made the armory humanity's only shield. But physicists specializing in temporal and probabilistic fields countered that the weapons were built without full understanding of their mechanisms. They demonstrated models predicting catastrophic outcomes, space-time ruptures, cascading probability failures, or feedback loops that could alter events beyond repair. The Erebus crew had wielded these tools only under extreme pressure, and even they had been unable to prevent the ship's eventual destruction. Then came the moral debate. The families of the Erebus victims, long accustomed to grief, stepped forward demanding caution. Their arguments carried emotional weight unmatched by data. They reminded the assembly that the weapons were born from suffering, created by people who had been forced into a cosmic war they never chose. Using those creations now, without understanding their true impact, risked repeating the same cycle of desperation. Military leadership refused to accept hesitation. They pointed to the rising energy in the sphere, the unpredictable fluctuations, and the fact that the Erebus had returned at a time suspiciously aligned with increasing cosmic anomalies detected across the outer systems. They believed the architects might already be observing the sphere's signal. Preparing defenses was not an act of aggression, they argued, but survival. Diplomats added yet another perspective. If the architects of silence interpreted humanity's use of their own warp technologies as hostile, the consequences could be catastrophic. But if humanity hid the tools or disabled the sphere, it could signal weakness or fear, inviting a response just as dangerous. Silence, action, or inaction each carried risk. Meanwhile, public reaction surged across every communication grid. Citizens demanded transparency, seeking assurance that the government wouldn't provoke an incomprehensible force or surrender to it. Fear mingled with pride. The Erebus had proven that humans had endured what should have destroyed them. People wanted to believe that humanity's stubborn resilience meant something in the face of cosmic giants. As the debates intensified, new data arrived from the boarding team. The sphere's activation wasn't random. It was escalating in direct response to proximity-based observation. Every time human sensors scanned it, the sphere adapted, adjusting patterns as though analyzing humanity with equal curiosity. This changed everything. The device was interacting, not simply emitting a dormant signal. This revelation split the assembly into two sharply opposed factions. One group demanded immediate isolation of the sphere, sealing it within containment fields and severing all observation that could accelerate activation. The other camp insisted the signal must be studied further. If the architects were aware of the Erebus's return, ignorance could be even more dangerous than discovery. In the end, compromise proved impossible. Humanity had reached a crossroads. They could lock the knowledge away, hoping the architects would ignore them. Or they could embrace the technology, unstable, terrifying, but powerful, and step into a future shaped by defiance rather than fear. The final decision was delayed only briefly by procedural necessity. But the truth was clear long before any vote was cast. Humanity would not face a threat of this scale divided. They would either rise together or fall together. As the assembly recessed to finalize their course, a single message echoed across every channel, scientific, political, civilian, spoken by those who understood that history had reached an irreversible point. The world would have to choose who it wanted to become before the architects answered the signal Awakini. The sphere's influence didn't stay confined to the Erebus for long. Within a day of its activation sequence stabilizing, deep space monitoring stations across the outer system began reporting faint disturbances. At first they seemed like sensor drift, but the deviations were too synchronized to dismiss. Background radiation levels dipped and spiked in perfect alignment with the sphere's pulses, and gravitational readings rippled with irregular signatures that followed no orbital pattern. These anomalies didn't originate from any known source. They appeared as if space itself was responding. Lunar Command called for an immediate review. Astronomers replayed the data and isolated a repeating pattern, a long wave of compressed frequencies followed by a sharp return to baseline. The oscillation resembled a response, an echo from beyond the system's edge. The analysts compared it to all cataloged natural phenomena, hoping to prove it harmless. Nothing matched. The rhythm was too deliberate, too structured. It felt like an acknowledgement. Then one observatory detected something far more alarming. A sector of deep space, previously silent, registered a disturbance shaped like a ripple passing through vacuum with no physical medium. The pattern moved with precision, almost as though following a trajectory. When the mapping algorithms reconstructed the path, the conclusion was immediate and chilling. The disturbance was oriented toward the solar system. The architects had noticed. The assembly reconvened in emergency session, but this time the atmosphere carried a different weight. The earlier debates on ethics and strategy had been heated. Now urgency stripped away hesitation. Messages from observatories continued to stream in, each confirming more distortions approaching from beyond detectable range. They were too far to analyze clearly, but their formation suggested coordination rather than coincidence. The initial reaction from many leaders was panic. Some demanded immediate dispersal of the Erebus's weapons to functioning bases. Others insisted the armory be sealed permanently to avoid provoking whatever was incoming. But a growing number of strategists argued that attempting to hide or dismantle the sphere would achieve nothing. The architects had already responded to the signal. Ignoring their approach would not delay it, it would only blind humanity to what came next. Despite the tension, a strange calm formed among the scientific corps. Many had spent their careers studying distant phenomena with little expectation of ever encountering higher civilizations. Now, they found themselves interpreting the first deliberate contact humanity had ever received, even if it came in the form of cosmic disturbances instead of language. They analyzed the oscillations until they detected an undeniable pattern, a compressed signature repeating at intervals calculated with absolute precision. It wasn't random interference. It wasn't natural. It was structured communication conveyed through distortions and fundamental forces. When decoded through probabilistic filters, the message became terrifyingly simple. It repeated a single concept across multiple layers of translation. Return what was stolen. The phrase hit every member of the assembly with the same cold clarity. The architects were not confused. They were not curious. They believed the sphere, and perhaps the accumulated knowledge within the Erebus, belonged to them. The implications were clear. Whether the sphere had been taken, borrowed, or built from their influence didn't matter. They expected compliance. And their approach suggested they were prepared to enforce their demand. Public communication channels erupted when the message was leaked. Fears surged across every habitat. People imagined an invasion by forces capable of manipulating physics at will. Governments pleaded for order, emphasizing that humanity had survived encounters before, even if indirectly. But the uncertainty was suffocating. No one knew whether the architects would arrive as destroyers or arbiters. Military analysts evaluated countermeasures, but most admitted privately that conventional weapons held no relevance. The Erebus's armory represented the only tools with even theoretical potential to disrupt architect-level distortions. That realization intensified the internal divide. Using the weapons might provoke a full-scale response. Not using them might allow immediate erasure. Through all arguments, one conclusion unified every faction: Earth could not meet this threat disorganized. The response had to be decisive, coordinated, and reflective of humanity's commitment to survival. The final hours of debate ended only when new ripples appeared at the edge of the system, stronger, closer, unmistakably focused. The architects were accelerating. The message the world had already feared echoed through the monitoring stations once more, clearer than before, as if proximity strengthened the transmission. Return what was stolen. Humanity now faced the arrival of a power their ancestors had barely escaped. And this time, the architects knew exactly where to look. The command assembly reconvened one final time, this time without debate. The approaching distortions had intensified to the point where deep space sensors struggled to remain stable. Entire observatories went offline, not from damage but from overwhelming interference. Even civilian devices began picking up faint tremors in electromagnetic fields. The architects were close enough that their presence distorted reality on the system's outskirts. Humanity had run out of time to weigh morality against survival. What emerged across every governing body was a stark consensus. If humanity intended to remain sovereign, it needed to demonstrate it would not kneel to a force that erased starships as if brushing dust from a table. Fear persisted, but fear carried no strategic value anymore. Strength, whether real, symbolic, or improvised, was the only language that might slow the architect's advance long enough for negotiation or deterrence. Scientists focused their efforts on the one weapon the Erebus logs described as stable enough for controlled demonstration. It was far from safe, but it was the only device whose operational parameters could be modeled with any confidence: the entropy compression array. Compact compared to others, the device functioned by collapsing informational states around a point, temporarily removing it from classical physics. When used at minimal power, it created a localized bubble of null probability, harmless in vacuum, but unmistakable in its signature. It was not a strike. It was a declaration. Engineers spent hours recalibrating the array, ensuring it wouldn't rupture spacetime or trigger uncontrolled cascade events. The boarding team transferred the device to an isolated test platform orbiting safely away from populated regions. Military personnel supervised, not to interfere but to ensure the process continued without political hesitation. The goal wasn't destruction, it was demonstration, proof that humanity possessed tools forged from the same distortions the architects commanded. When the array was armed, its containment rings shuddered in a pattern that no human machine had ever produced. Microfractures appeared in the vacuum around it, not on physical structures, but in the probability values themselves. Space rippled like disturbed water without altering mass or trajectory. The platform's external recorders strained to capture the phenomenon, their feeds flickering as reality thinned at the device's focal point. Then the array released the pulse. The distortion expanded silently, a shimmering sphere of collapsing potential that erased its own presence within seconds. Nothing exploded and nothing was damaged, yet every sensor in the system registered the event with perfect clarity. A void had formed and vanished in the same breath. The demonstration was unmistakable. Humanity could manipulate the same forces the architects wielded. The pulse propagated across the system faster than any mechanical transmission. It was not sound, not light, not a signal in any human sense. It was a disruption in the underlying structure of probability that radiated outward like a beacon. The architects would sense it the same way they sensed the sphere's activation, as a challenge or a warning. Once the pulse passed, Earth broadcast its message. It was crafted by linguists, physicists, and psychologists working together to create something neither submissive nor hostile. The statement was simple, carried on encoded frequencies but projected with enough force to reach the approaching distortions. We endured your silence. We resisted your erasure. We are not anomalies to be corrected. We choose our fate. The message was repeated on multiple channels, each reinforced by the aftershock of the entropy array's pulse. The intention was clear. Humanity acknowledged the architects but refused to surrender the knowledge carved from its own suffering. On Earth, fear shifted into a harsher emotion, resolve. People understood that they had stepped into a confrontation where their species might be judged, not by their weakness, but by their audacity to stand when erasure was simpler. For once, global unity was not a slogan. It was a necessity born from survival. Humanity's scientists positioned themselves at control stations monitoring every ripple within the system. The military fortified defensive satellites, not with hope of repelling an architect attack, but with the intent of buying seconds if needed. Civilians prepared for impact at scales they barely comprehended. And the boarding team remained on the Erebus, guarding the sphere and the armory, knowing they were now custodians of a legacy that could either protect the species or condemn it. The architects drew nearer. The distortions sharpened into coherent patterns. The air of inevitability hung across Earth like an unshed storm. Yet humanity did not retreat or conceal itself. The pulse had been sent. The message had been spoken. Whatever came next would define the species forever. As the distortions crept deeper into the system, humanity braced for whatever force would emerge from the void. Observatories tracked the approaching anomalies until their instruments buckled under the strain. Even blind, humanity sensed the movement like pressure building on the edge of consciousness. The architects had not responded verbally to the pulse or the transmission, but their silence now felt different. It was not the silent erasure described in the Erebus logs. This silence listened. It evaluated. In the hours that followed, something unexpected happened. The sphere aboard the Erebus shifted its oscillation pattern. Instead of escalating toward activation, its energy began stabilizing, settling into a steady hum that no longer surged unpredictably. Its once chaotic symbols aligned into repeating cycles, forming coherent sequences that resembled a cooling system winding down after peak output. Whatever message it had been attempting to send was complete. It no longer searched. It waited. Scholars and analysts monitored every change, noting that the stabilization mirrored a similar phenomenon detected across the interstellar disturbances. The distortion slowed, not halting but decelerating as though the approaching force were reassessing. The architects had received the pulse. They had parsed humanity's declaration. And now, they had paused to decide what the act meant. Uncertainty weighed heavily on every outpost and settlement. Citizens gathered around emergency stations, staring at the skies despite knowing their eyes could not perceive what approached. Others retreated inward, clinging to family or faith or the quiet stoicism humans have always pulled from when no reassurance exists. Yet across every corner of civilization, one truth pulsed just as strongly as fear. Humanity had stood upright in the face of something cosmic, and that act alone imbued a strange pride no crisis had achieved before. Inside the assembly chambers, the atmosphere shifted from panic to reflection. Leaders realized the moment had expanded beyond a threat. It had become a crossroads, a moment in which humanity confronted what it was and what it aspired to become. The Erebus had returned, not as a harbinger of doom, but as a mirror reflecting a species capable of persistence even when the universe itself tried to unmake it. The boarding team remained stationed on the Erebus, watching the sphere with a mixture of caution and reverence. They understood the weight of what rested before them. The weapon chamber symbolized desperation. The sphere symbolized ingenuity under duress. Captain Malorum's echo had symbolized sacrifice. Each element of the ship carried a story of humans refusing to yield even when caught in a domain where physical laws bent against them. The team felt the legacy of those who had fought through overlapping timelines just to leave a message of warning and hope. Then, without warning, the distortions across the system began to recede. Not collapse, withdrawal. Sensors regained clarity, field monitors stabilized, and the pervasive tension pressing against human perception lifted with startling suddenness. The architects were not gone entirely, but the movement indicated retreat rather than advance. They had witnessed the demonstration. They had recognized the message. And they had chosen, for reasons humanity could only theorize, to step back. No proclamation accompanied their withdrawal. No ultimatum or explanation. Only the fading echo of the earlier directive, now devoid of aggression. It felt less like a demand and more like a statement of cosmic hierarchy. The architects acknowledged humanity's presence but asserted that certain boundaries remained inviolate. Humanity was not erased, but neither was it accepted. Survival was not victory, but it was possibility. The sphere dimmed further, settling into a dormant state. Its activation cycle ended, its purpose fulfilled. It no longer sought to attract attention, nor did it threaten to ignite. It had completed the task encoded into it by those who crafted it during the ship's impossible journey. Now it simply existed as a reminder, a relic of a conflict fought beyond the reach of history. In the following days, the Erebus was escorted into secure orbit. Researchers prepared for decades of study. Philosophers debated what it meant to be seen yet spared by incomprehensible beings. The public mourned anew for the lost passengers but held a renewed respect for their struggle. Humanity had not been annihilated, and that alone redefined the species' role in the universe. The final reflection emerged not from officials or scholars but from the people themselves. The collective understanding settled like gravity across the world. The Erebus had not returned as a tragedy. It had returned as a testament. A message that humanity could survive forces far greater than itself, not through strength alone, but through resilience, intellect, and the stubborn refusal to surrender identity. The architects shaped silence across regions of space. Humanity, however, shaped meaning within it. And in that truth, the species found its path forward, uncertain, fragile, but undeniably its own.